All right, well, welcome back, everybody. Our next session is our roundtable on state healthy soils legislation and programs. And I am really pleased to introduce our moderator, Vermont State Representative Carolyn Partridge. Representative Partridge is a 20-year member of the Vermont House, where she chairs the House Committee on Agriculture and Forestry, and she also serves as the longtime co-chair of the CSG East Agriculture and Rural Affairs Policy Committee. Representative Partridge was the inspiration for our work at CSG East on natural climate solutions. She helped us organize a session on regenerative agriculture at our Northeast Climate Summit at Yale back in 2019. And that led to the formation of our working group and to many, many discussions over the last year and a half. Representative Partridge, I thank you for your leadership, and I turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Rona. Really appreciate it. I'm just delighted to be here today. I want to let you know that carbon sequestration on farms and in forestry is something we've been working on for several years in Vermont. And I'm so glad we have this opportunity to meet on a regional basis and in a regional forum, and to include those from other CSG jurisdictions as well. Today, we're going to be looking at state healthy soils legislation and programs, and we're very, very fortunate to have several speakers today. I'll just give a little framing here. Many northeastern states, including Maryland, Massachusetts, Vermont, and New York, have established or are planning to implement healthy soils programs. This panel, consisting of state legislators, academics, and representatives from executive agencies, will provide an overview of these efforts and any quantifiable results that they can share, as well as a discussion of the challenges that they've encountered in terms of funding, farmer outreach, and methodologies. So I'm going to introduce the speakers as we come to them. Our first speaker is Dr. Sara, who is a professor and climate extension specialist at the University of Maryland. From 2017 to 2020, Sara worked at the Vermont with the Maryland Department of Agriculture on soil carbon sequestration. Her report, Increasing Soil Health and Sequestering Carbon in Agricultural Soils, a Natural Climate Solution, will be published in 2021 by the Isaac Walton League of America and the National Wildlife Federation. And I am going to be timing our speakers because we want to make sure we can get everybody in. But Sara, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'll just share my screen right away because I know that you're going to be timing us all. As she said, I have been working with the Maryland Department of Agriculture for a few years. I'm not directly associated with them anymore, but I did start working on this report with them. And since I'm, I don't have my finger on the Maryland pulse at the moment, I want to share with you just some challenges that I think many of the states are facing, and also some questions that we might want to think about when it comes to talking about using soil carbon sequestration. One of the challenges that has really recently just sort of come to my mind is that I think many folks in the states who are working in agriculture are having a little bit of an issue sort of gripping the problem. And this is not a criticism of the agencies at all, but just to say that the soil health work that has been done so far by state agencies and also by NRCS has been motivated largely, I think, by water quality and a desire to reduce erosion. And this has been true for many, many years. So certainly Maryland has been really motivated by water quality. And this is one reason that Maryland leads the nation in using some of these key NRCS strategies like no-till and cover crops. So our agency personnel really know water issues, but they may not be as familiar with the climate problem and the critical role that agriculture can play as a climate solution, and the importance of soil carbon sequestration, I think is maybe not top of mind in some of the agencies. So I'm hoping actually that this report that will be published, which is meant to be kind of a primer, and it's written in plain language to introduce soil health and its relationship to the climate problem and the NRCS strategies, et cetera. I think this will be potentially very helpful to the states. Another one of the challenges that has come up in Maryland, and I think is coming up other places also, is the whole issue of measuring soil carbon, and how do we measure the impacts of the NRCS soil carbon sequestering practices. I think people want to and think we need to measure changes in carbon at the field level, have every farmer out there sampling his or her fields to quantify the carbon benefit of these practices. And yet it's very, very difficult statistically to detect the kinds of small changes year to year that occur after these practices have been implemented. You really need around 10 years. And the problem is that the changes in soil carbon are small relative to the gigantic amount of soil carbon already in the soil. So this is my opinion. I think soil testing in every field is too variable. It would be a huge problem to coordinate for every state, all these soil tests. I really don't think it's needed. For greenhouse gas planning and accounting at the state level, I would recommend that people really use Comet Planner. The Comet tools are very sophisticated combinations of data and modeling that provide per acre per year estimates of how much greenhouse gas reduction we get from each of these NRCS practices. The folks at the state level, I think, or really most people are not very familiar with how Comet works. And I'm a sort of background statistician myself, but I've just realized that when we say estimate, which in statistics means something very formal with models behind it, et cetera, most average people think that means guess. And so I think a lot of folks maybe don't quite understand that Comet Planner is way beyond the guess stage. I've written a little explainer for this if anybody is interested in that. Quantifying greenhouse gas reductions, I think that in order to actually really get down and dirty with the soil testing, we need to revive the National Soil Monitoring Network that NRCS had in place from 2007 to 2016. And this involves the using samples in each county across the nation in these land resource areas that are localized with GPS tracking at these national resource inventory sites, for which there has been management data taken since 1982. So I think we need trained professionals to take thousands of samples each year at these sites and then use these data, because many of the sites are going to be in agricultural areas, use these data to test the impacts of the NRCS practices and improve the Comet model. So rather than farmers going out and taking, soil samples, which are highly, highly variable. And finally, one thing I've been worried about recently a lot is the whole issue of how we pay farmers. It's very important to pay farmers to start to use and implement these practices to sequester carbon. But what's the best way to do this? Incentives or a sort of market-based offset program. Here's that picture again about how we get to net zero, which really requires very rapid reductions in all emissions that we can possibly get our hands on. Publicly funded incentives to store carbon, to do these negative emission strategies. These publicly funded incentives would reflect the awareness that reducing atmospheric carbon benefits everyone. It's not the farmer's responsibility to solve this problem. Market-based offsets do provide money for the farmers, but what worries me is that they don't reduce emissions. And so we see all these advertisements of corporations that are going to be net zero by 2050, 2030, whenever. And so they're buying up they want to buy up offsets for soil carbon sequestration. But I'm worried that, in fact, although we have these pictures that show this increase in negative emissions, carbon removal technologies, according to the National Academy of Sciences, we don't really know how to do all of these things. They're not all in place. Soil, carbon sequestration, and forests, that we know how to do, and those are sort of locked in. But I worry that we may not have enough negative emissions to reach net zero by 2050 if we use our soil carbon sequestration to allow corporations to continue to emit, when in fact those emissions could be curbed. So these are just questions that I'm putting out there, and I will yield the floor to the rest of the panelists now. I'd be happy to answer any questions, or either in the question session or by email later on. So I will stop my screen share. Thank you so much.
Sara, you did amazingly well. You're in under 8 minutes.
Oh, I had 2 more minutes? Oh, okay. Well, we'll use those for questions.
Okie doke. All right. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate your presentation. So we'll turn next to New York State Assemblywoman Didi Barrett. Assemblywoman Barrett will talk about New York's carbon farming pilot. Barrett's pioneering legislation on carbon farming in New York State has attracted widespread interest from the media as well as other states. So Didi, thank you so much for being part of this today.
Thank you, Carolyn. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you to my friends at Scenic Hudson and CSG for your thoughtful work on preparing and organizing and planning this conference. And I want to thank all of you for joining us, the rest of you for joining us for this very timely conversation. In 1937, President Franklin D. Roosevelt said, quote, "A nation that destroys its soils destroys itself." And he added, quote, "Forests are the lungs of our land, purifying the air and giving fresh strength to our people." I can always count on either Franklin or Eleanor Roosevelt to have a smart and fitting quote, whatever topic I'm speaking on, which I especially appreciate, as Hyde Park, the Hudson Valley town that was their lifetime home and where they are both buried, is in my assembly district. However, when it comes to soil and trees, FDR truly spoke from his experience. Throughout his life, when asked his profession, he always called himself a tree farmer. I personally first became interested in carbon farming in 2014 after hearing a talk by Ben Banks Dobson, who you heard referred to earlier by Ned, of Stonehouse Farm. He's a visionary farmer in my district. I paid him a visit, learned how he had turned hundreds of acres of soil formerly owned and worked by Syngenta, the agrochemical giant, into a healthier, more productive organic farm, how his practices were taking carbon out of the atmosphere where it was so destructive and storing carbon in the soil where it was doing good things. And as a new legislator at that point, I began to brainstorm how to get New York State to support this win-win-win combo at the nexus of resilient agriculture and environmental conservation, 2 top priorities of mine. In early 2017, we introduced the Carbon Farming Act. We like to call it groundbreaking legislation. It created a financial incentive for farmers to encourage climate smart practices such as no-till systems, cover crops, planting trees and perennial forages, and managing compost application. This was very much a new approach, though these practices are traditional and time-tested. And the Farm Bureau and other more established institutions were wary, but they were curious. For some time, I had been troubled by the widespread policy, as Sara alluded to, that focused on carbon taxes, fees, and penalties, all of which seemed to me to make damaging practices acceptable as long as someone was willing to pay for it. As a mother, I know that you get better results with a carrot than a stick, and I wanted to incentivize good carbon practices, in addition to bringing agriculture into the mix when discussing greenhouse gas reduction. The Carbon Farming Act passed the Assembly, but it also raised lots of fair questions, some including how you measure and how you incentivize that Sara referenced, which spawned a research study which Cornell carried out and released last year. In the meantime, I grew impatient with the slow process. And in 2019, with the support of my legislative colleagues, Scenic Hudson and others, we were able to enact language in the New York State budget and secure $400,000 for the Hudson Valley Carbon Farming Pilot Project. The 2-year pilot project tasked the Dutchess County Soil and Water Conservation District with implementing the project in conjunction with Columbia, Ulster, Sullivan, and Orange County Soil and Water Conservation Districts. These were all the counties that were part of they're all obviously Hudson Valley counties, but that were part of the pilot. The goal was to study the sequestration potential of a range of agricultural and best management practices on carbon and other greenhouse gases. The carbon farming pilot allows the soil and water conservation districts a formal opportunity to measure carbon content in active farming soil over a 2-year period to give us a better understanding of the specific benefits of various climate smart farming practices. The goal is to encourage a statewide effort to promote carbon farming practices that will ultimately help New York State reach its climate change goals, while at the same time improving the productivity and resiliency of the state's essential agricultural businesses. So here are some key facts about the project. It was launched in November 2020, delayed because of COVID. The intention was to start it in the spring. There are 20 farms involved. 2 of them are sweet corn and vegetable farms, and others are orchards and stone fruit farms, organic field crops, dairies, and there's 1 organic dairy in that mix, small and large organic vegetables, 2 black dirt operations, and 2 mixed small livestock. The fields are being checked a few times a year, for example, to verify the cover cropping germination, and there will be an annual review. Soil follow-up tests are likely in the summer and fall of 2021. And there have been some actual practices that did happen over this winter, including drainage and some that are just being embarked on right now in the spring, buffer projects and planting. As part of the pilot, 3 outreach events are planned. We had 1 last fall, and there's likely to be 1 earlier or this spring, maybe June or early in the summer, and then a wrap up at the end. And just to give you some examples, in one of my 2 counties I represent, Dutchess and Columbia, but in Dutchess there are 4 farms that are implementing livestock operation, and they're updating their grazing practices. They're rotating grazing. They're looking at better management systems. Some of them are building buffers with fencing and planting trees and shrubs, particularly along streams. There are others that are working on mulch spreading. There's a range of different kinds of projects. One in Orange County, which is the heart of black dirt country, has been looking at water control structure being installed to hold soil moisture at a constant level, and drainage ditches to reduce flooding and increase crop management abilities on that in that kind of an operation. So that is the pilot, but let me also share some other interesting New York State news around soil health. So over the last several years, I've also pushed for new soil health legislation in New York State. The current laws were originally enacted during the Dust Bowl, probably the time that those comments that FDR made, which I quoted at the outset, and they desperately need to be updated to reflect the changes in food and farming priorities, but also our understanding of the importance of soil health and resiliency in ensuring a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. The soils in New York State are extremely diverse and run the gamut from nutrient-rich to barren, sandy to silty to chalky to clay. Healthy soils are vital to productive farming, food security, natural resource protection, and long-term climate change mitigation, as we all know. Healthy soils are what enable us to have clean air and water, plentiful crops, productive grazing land, abundant forests, diverse wildlife, and stunning view sheds, like those in my own assembly district. I am pleased to share the news that the chairs of the Assembly and Senate Agriculture Committees, Assemblymember Donna Lupardo, Senator Michelle Hinchey, and I recently introduced legislation which would establish the Soil Health and Climate Resiliency Act in the state of New York. This bill establishes programs for soil health and climate resilient farming, along with the Soil Health Partnership and Research Framework. It defines soil health practices, soil health projects, climate adaptation, and climate mitigation. These programs will be administered by the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets in cooperation with the state soil and water conservation districts to help farmers in adapting soil health practices to optimize soil health through grants and incentives. The climate resiliency piece would also be administered by Ag and Markets and would provide matching grants to soil and water conservation districts to fund projects which mitigate greenhouse gas emissions on farmland or promote the adaptation of farmlands to projected climate change impacts. In closing, I am very proud of the pioneering work my office has done to put carbon farming and soil health on the radar in New York State and beyond. These are existential issues we are grappling with here. And I think we all understand in a new way after these last several years, and most pointedly after the announcement yesterday, the importance of leadership in this climate challenge. Critical as it is, this work cannot be done only about hitting climate targets. As leaders, we must ensure we do this equitably, protecting all of our communities, respecting our soils, wetlands, and natural habitats, and honoring the enduring restorative power of Mother Nature. I look forward to working with all of you as leaders in our region. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Didi. We really appreciate your work on this and look forward to hearing more during question and answer period. Our next speaker is someone who's very familiar to me, Ryan Patch. He's Deputy Director of the Water Quality Division of the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. Ryan will talk about Vermont's Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group and Healthy Soils initiatives, which I'm proud to say we just in a recent bill dedicated $250,000 to continue this work. And, you know, Ryan, I'm not seeing you right at the second, but I see your screen. So go ahead. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you, Representative Partridge, for the introduction. And I, yes, will walk us through the Payment for Ecosystem Services and Soil Health Working Group and some of the work that's led up to the creation of that group, some of the outputs from it, and the potential influence on the conversation around soil health and potential for sequestration of carbon in our soils. A quick introduction to Vermont: small state, mountainous state, forested state, about 73% of the land base in forest, about 12% in agriculture. Despite this small footprint for agriculture, there's a large contribution on the water quality side. And to Dr. Villa's points, my entry into this soil health landscape and the main focus of the state of Vermont and agricultural environmental management has been focused on water quality considerations. And so for the purposes of this presentation, I wanted to share, in my view, the concomitant or the process that has associated the water quality work within the state and how that has evolved into a broader focus around soil health and ecosystem services that can be derived from well-managed agricultural cropland. So despite the 12% across the state within the Lake Champlain Basin, there's a significant contribution from agriculture to phosphorus, which has led to the development of the TMDL for phosphorus for the Lake Champlain Basin, as well as the MENT for Magog. The Lake Champlain Basin TMDL is what brings us to a quick discussion of the history that led to the passage of the Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group. Act 64 of 2015 is Vermont's Clean Water Act, and that directed all sectors that had a contribution to the phosphorus problem in Lake Champlain to adopt new standards and roll out new programs. And so what I'm attempting to share on the left-hand side here is that along with the water quality and the required rulemaking that the Agency of Ag was required to undertake, that the farmer working groups that were formed in advance, after the disapproval of the TMDL, really dug into this conversation of water quality. And out of that came recommendations, not just for land management practices that could be required or adopted, but a definition of healthy soils that was embedded within Act 64 of 2015, and this conversation and focus on regenerative agriculture, healthy soils, ecosystem services evolved over the next several years. None of the bills, being signed into law, unfortunately, but eventually, in part to the leadership of farmer watershed groups, led to the passage of two bills which focus on both a regenerative farming pilot program and the Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group, which I will share a summary of in future slides. Not to belabor the water quality point, but the water quality focus has led to significant funding for education outreach, technical financial assistance, as well as inspection enforcement of agriculture. This has led to the formation of many farmer watershed groups, or three big ones across the state, which have worked to share and collaborate on the water quality conversation and strategies throughout the state, but has led to a really significant adoption and expansion of conservation practices throughout the state, which is directed by a broad network of partners. And I think to share with this group something that's been important for moving forward, not just the water quality achievements within the state, but this broader focus on soil health is, the 13 state, federal, nonprofit partners that come together as the Vermont Ag Water Quality Partnership that works with, all sizes and types of farms throughout the state, which has been able to move the primary focus of the state environmental management, which is this phosphorus and water quality conversation, which has resulted in some big contributions from the agricultural sector to the phosphorus reduction efforts of the state. Between 99 and 96% between fiscal years 2016 and 2020. And so this speaks to not only the engagement of Vermont farmers, but also their participation in programs and their collaboration to develop good programming. And this brings us to kind of that conversation around healthy soils within the Water Quality Act, to the broader conversations around ecosystem services. And the three farmer watershed groups brought to a joint hearing of the legislature a proposal for valuing the ecosystem services that can be brought to the state from well-managed agriculture, including food security and environmental benefit. And this led to the passage of Act 83 of 2019 and really helped elevate the conversation around ecosystem services. Within the state, folks are most familiar, of course, with food and fiber being derived from farmland and those outputs, but additional benefits for soil carbon sequestration, water quality, and watershed resilience is, of course, a conversation that has come out of this process. Studies within the state have shown how the water quality and the ecosystem service outputs have benefits for not just the associated tourist or home values or along the lake, but also how in a highly ag watershed, farmers' managements of floodplain and also that the wetlands that they manage are also naturally occurring within the watershed can significantly buffer infrastructure and settlements along rivers from, traumatic climate events like Irene, avoiding significant damage from these agricultural croplands. So Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group is formed. It is a collaboration of, again, state, federal agencies, nonprofit, university researchers, other environmental groups, and of course, farmers are at the core of this conversation in grappling with and proposing a program that will meet the goals of the farmers, which is compensation for the additional benefits their management brings to the state that is currently uncompensated, and really looking at a holistic, expansion or vision of, as the working group termed it, in which farmers are hired to use their ingenuity and know-how in caring for the land to rebuild Vermont's natural capital. The water quality programming in the state, and as many are familiar with, USDA and EQIP pays for practices, right? The current paradigm is, a portion of the cost of implementing cover crop or no-till is cost shared, and we model or estimate improvements to, phosphorus reduction from the implementation of those practices. The working group really wants to get back to the focus of healthy soils, the measurement of healthy soils, to understand at what point do you have such healthy soils that you can derive additional ecosystem service benefit. But the three main focus areas of this working group are not just the water quality, but even more the climate emission reduction, mitigation, or adaptation benefits, but also the resilience that can be built in to the waterways within Vermont. And so that's really what the working group has been focused on. COVID did interrupt the meetings of the working group during 2020, but as Representative Partridge shared, we have been reconvened in 2021 and have funding to plug into the additional work that's happening by researchers throughout the state. And this is where I'll spend just a minute to try to highlight some of the outputs from research that is informing the working group, which is acting in some ways as a clearinghouse or drawing from a lot of the research and helping to inform the research and projects that are happening out there in the state. As I mentioned, there's a regenerative farming pilot that was formed back in 2013, focused.
Ryan, you're muted for some reason. Now it looks like Ryan's unmuted, but I can't hear him. Jack, what's going on?
Ryan, I would just check your audio settings next to your microphone. And if you have headphones in, it might be an issue with that. No, still nothing.
Yeah, Ryan, we can't hear you. Well, this is broadband in Vermont, my friends. Another problem.
Ryan, maybe excuse me. Try unplugging your headphones. See if that maybe makes a difference.
Still not working. Perhaps what we should do is move on to Briana, and we'll try and get Ryan back on to finish when she's done. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I'm back.
Oh,
I believe.
wait, you're there. Okay. Why don't you?
Yeah.
All right, Briana, hold on. We'll finish up with Ryan and we'll turn it to you.
Terribly
Go ahead,
sorry.
Ryan.
It appears that Zoom call-in number has been disconnected. I have just another slide or two that I will share and apologize for the interruption. Where were we? Best working group. Yeah. Yep. Farmers enrolled, really excited at looking at this kind of holistic accounting beyond just water quality, focused on, climate and carbon considerations. We got 8 farms to go through the whole program, 148 fields and over 1,500 acres. These farms, are exhibiting some, good characteristics in their soil. A lot of optimal readings, but certainly more constraints within some of the cropland than the hayland. And this work, helped inform a potential program option for the working group. But the working group really is focused on this question around measurement versus modeling. The farmers on the group really want to make sure their management, which they feel they're management to a very high level that may not be captured by some of the more generic models out there, they really want to see in-field, edge of field, or in-stream monitoring to quantify changes in how their management or what their current level of runoff might be, from their farm. And so this is an area of research that supporting University of Vermont is engaged in, and it is something that the working group wants to see more work on. We're trying to move into this Pay-For-Performance program within the state, and trying to build onto the existing Pay-For-Practice model. We are using modeling within this program, focusing on Apex, but the goal is to be able to quantify how a farm is doing compared to historic regulatory baselines within the TMDL. To bring this all back together, or attempt to, I know I'm over time with the interruption, I apologize. The Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group was formed in 2019. 2020 brought the state of Vermont the Global Warming Solutions Act, which established greenhouse gas reduction requirements. Agriculture is 12.2% of the emissions. And so the work of the Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group is very timely for informing the process that is engaged in the Climate Council that was formed by the Global Warming Solutions Act to make recommendations for how ag can meet these emission reduction targets. Currently, as I shared, the state is very focused on this phosphorus reduction process, for which we can track acres of implementation and quantify outputs for phosphorus reduction. We don't yet have a protocol or methods for potential carbon sequestration equivalents within the state, and I think that's where a lot of work of the Climate Council is focused. And then just to cap it all off, researchers at University of Vermont have looked at kind of Vermont soils compared to a national average, and this kind of speaks to, I feel, why farmers want to have this field-specific monitoring or measurement, because on average, Vermont soils exceed soil organic matter levels throughout the U.S. And if you quantify that and look for changes or improvements, a lot of the, if you look at sequestration in the net sense for the state of Vermont emissions from agriculture, there can be a lot of gain from looking at the carbon that's stored in Vermont's soils. And so that's I think one of the reasons why farmers are so interested in that field-specific monitoring. So apologies for the technical interruptions. Thank you for your patience. Here's my contact information, and look forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Great, Ryan, thank you so much. And I'm sorry too for those the interruption. As I said, that's Vermont broadband. And now we're going to turn to Briana Alfaro, who is a soil carbon field researcher at the Northeast Organic Farming Organization in New York, so NOFA New York, and Soulfire Farm. Briana coordinates educational program at NOFA New York and at Soulfire Farm. She's working with BIPOC farmers to better understand carbon sequestration tools and healthy soils management practices. And Briana, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I am Briana Alfaro. I prefer she, her pronouns. And like I was just introduced, I'm actually the outreach coordinator at NOFA New York, and I am the soil carbon researcher at Soulfire Farm. And I also grow cut flowers and medicinal herbs here in central New York. And today I'm here to share some of my past, present, and future healthy soils work that I've done with regional farmers, mostly in New York the past year. I'll present key. All right, I will present key recommendations within a report. Farmers share experiences and challenges adopting healthy soils practices that documents findings of a multi-year effort to understand the challenges farmers face in adopting healthy soils practices. And I'll share with you a NOFA program I'm designing that is based on the findings in the report, work I've done and I'm currently doing in the field with Northeast farmers, and just based on my own experiences as a beginning farmer, a farmer of color, and a farmer in New York. And I'll conclude by sharing a bit about the research project I'm working on at Soulfire Farm and with 4 other BIPOC farmers. The photo here is a lovely one. I love this one. I took it while doing some field research at a farm in the Rochester area. And it's a beautiful mix of cover crop. Right, so the farmers share experiences and challenges adopting healthy soils practices was a multi-state effort by the NOFA chapters in the region. It was written by Carolyn Roselle, who previously led soil and education programs at NOFA Mass, but has recently transitioned to a position as a soil health specialist with American Farmland Trust. The report documents findings from a 2-year study conducted collaboratively between the states that make up the NOFA community. So we held in 2019, we held roundtable discussions and conducted surveys at events. We reached 192 farmers, and of those farmers, there was an average of 12.4 years of experience per farmer, and there was an average of 20.25 cultivated acres per farmer. In 2020, due to the pandemic, we, instead of doing in-person events, we switched to doing a survey. With this survey, we reached 83 farmers. 66% of those were in Massachusetts, 18% in New York, and the remainder were in Connecticut, New Jersey, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. And with this 2020 survey, the average years of experience for the farmers was 16.5, and the average cultivated acreage was 26.25. These were mostly vegetable producers, and we assume they were mostly certified organic or using organic practices because of our outreach efforts within the NOFA chapters. So I just wanted to highlight some of the key recommendations that we found. And I will drop the link to this report so you can view it as well after I present. So one of the key findings was that we need support for experienced farmers in providing education and technical support. While there are many technical assistance providers out there, we find time and time again that farmers prefer to learn from other farmers. There are so many decision-making tools and resources available, but working with a farmer in your region can be incredibly helpful when understanding how to actually implement the healthy soils practices. For example, if you want to plant a cover crop, how do you know what to plant and when and where and how to plant it, how to terminate it? There's so much decision-making that goes into all of this, and it depends on the context of your farm, what equipment you have access to, what you're growing, and how you market your products. These experienced farmers need to be compensated fairly for sharing this expertise. The next recommendation is for financial and technical assistance to support transition costs. So transitioning to no-till or reduced tillage costs money, and farmers may not see a return on investment for a few years. These costs may include extra labor or equipment like tarps or compost. And I just want to add to this wasn't part of the report, but just in my experience working with farmers of color, I would also recommend that there is a huge need for culturally appropriate technical service providers. The next finding is support for soil testing, both lab tests and in field. Submitting soil tests to a lab is wonderful. We can find out a lot of information. And we can see what a farmer is working with, and it can help us better understand progress made with any changes to practices. But lab tests, while incredibly valuable, are also costly. I'm working with farmers to measure soil carbon in the field, which can be a more accessible alternative, but I do believe the two types of testing are complementary and provide different information. The next recommendation is for sustainable revenue streams to expand access to technical support. And I won't go into those, but if you read the report, there's more information there and some suggestions. And overall, we need to create a culture of soil care shared by farmers, the public, and policymakers. And this is in the photo is just one of the tests that we do in the field is counting earthworms, which are an indicator of carbon in the soil. So this is just a lovely piece of soil where we found a lot of worms. So taking this information and, you know, my experience with farmers in the field and my own experiences, I am designing a program that will hopefully launch next year. I'm still seeking funding and resources for this program, but it leverages existing resources and partnerships like the ones we have here in New York with NRCS and Cornell. But it also creates a system of shared decision-making among farmers, and it provides incentives to support successful implementation of healthy soils practices. So to start, we would really like to start this program with regional beginning farmers. And the heart of the program is a cohort mentorship program. So we would have small groups of beginning farmers that are based regionally, so they have access to each other's farms to share knowledge. And they're also, each group would be paired with a farmer mentor. So as I mentioned before, farmers want to learn from other farmers, and it's really important to take advantage of the farming experience that we have in the region. We would also like to provide soil testing, lab tests, and teach the carbon proxy tests in field testing that I mentioned before. Shared learning experiences. Traditionally, we have held winter conferences, which are great, and then also on-farm field days, so that we can see innovative practices in the field and ask questions about how to implement them. And then I would also like to include a cost share for transition for some of the items I mentioned before, compost, equipment, etc. And there are some programs, but sometimes these are out of reach for beginning farmers who might not qualify because they don't own land or they don't grow on enough land, etc. And this photo here is one of the farms that I worked with. We are digging a hole to look at soil texture, to count worms, and do a few other tests that we do in the field. And now I will transition to the work that I have actually just recently started with Soil Fire Farm, looking at soil carbon in the field. And I have started with just interviewing these 5 farmers that I'm working with. And one just statement quote that really resonated with me was one farmer nearby who said, "I want to know the story of my soil." And I think that this really reflects a desire to build a strong relationship with the land that I think a lot of farmers share, but I find it to be really common among farmers of color. Because of this desire to farm in relationship with the land and ecosystem, Black and Indigenous farmers are using regenerative farming practices and ancestral strategies to reduce emissions and capture excess carbon. This project comes from the need for reliable field-tested research about the effectiveness of regenerative farming practices in capturing carbon in the soil. We also need an evaluation of the accessibility and accuracy of on-farm soil carbon measurement tools for farmers on the ground. And we need dissemination of these best practices to communities who are often excluded, including Spanish-speaking farmers and farmers of color. And this project was also came as a result of a survey that was conducted by the Northeast Farmers of Color Network and Soil Fire Farm alumni, where we learned that 70% of farmers want to learn more about carbon sequestration methods and tools for measuring soil carbon. So I have begun just by discussing, meeting the farmers via phone and connecting with them, learning more about their farms and their practices. And later this spring, I will be visiting all the farms in order to do side-by-side comparisons of on-farm carbon capture tools. Some of these are conducted with items you can get at a hardware store. Those are actually my favorite ones. And some require special tools or field kits. So we'll be using a microbiometer. We'll be looking at basal respiration. We'll be looking at active carbon. We'll be performing a slake test, which you can see in this photo here. And we'll be looking at infiltration of water, soil hardness, and we'll be counting earthworms. And the purpose of this project is to evaluate the accessibility and the accuracy of these tests with farmers of color and to disseminate findings and resource guides to groups of farmers who often aren't reached by existing programs. And that is all I have to share. Thank you for attending this whole program today. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
Briana, thank you so much. That was very interesting. We do have, and now it's time to turn to some questions. And we do have several in the question and answer box, and feel free to contribute. I think we have until about 5 noon. So I will go to the first question, which is from Josie Gordon. How do these large companies promising lowering their greenhouse gas emissions measure their reduction and impact? Are they using Comet Planner or is it another technology? And I think Comet Planner is a soil, but I'm not the expert here on that. So I wonder who would like to take that. Sara, Ryan, anyone, just feel free to unmute yourself and jump in.
So Josie, I don't know how the corporations are actually accounting for how much soil carbon sequestration they're getting, or you would measure the effect of the soil carbon sequestration as greenhouse gas reduction. So I'm not really quite up on that, but I imagine that they are using estimates from Comet Planner. The reason that you can't get very good answers from direct soil testing is that, again, as I said, the amount of carbon change from 1 year of no-till or 1 year of cover crops is very small relative to how much carbon is in the soil already. So it's hard to detect any kind of a significant change without a ton of very, very highly controlled, precise testing. So when a farmer goes out to do a soil test, and there will be an answer about, how much carbon is there, whether it's changed or not. But statistically speaking, it's very unlikely that the result of that soil test will actually reflect the real situation. It's a statistical problem. And so the danger is that people do a lot of soil testing and they find no change. Okay, well, that doesn't mean there hasn't been a change. It just means they couldn't detect a change, or their test says there's been a change, but it isn't a statistically significant change. So I think farmers can be very discouraged if they do soil testing and they see no change. And that doesn't mean there wasn't a change. It just means they couldn't detect it statistically. So that's a kind of technical, nuanced answer. But I really worry about, a reliance on, let's go take the soil test in the field to see how much carbon you're sequestering. So.
Thank you, Sara. Does anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just add, I definitely agree that especially these field tests are, there's just not enough yet known about them. I do find as a farmer that they tell me something about my soil. And I think, Sara, we talked about this on Monday, just really briefly, that maybe they aren't the most accurate at precisely determining how much carbon is stored in the soil, but they still can give you an idea of how healthy your soil is. And I think farmers who really want to have a relationship with your soil, they give you a framework to really build a relationship and see how your practices are impacting the health of your soil.
Yeah, I just like to respond to that. I totally agree that the soil testing is great for soil health. I just don't think it is useful for measuring carbon sequestration or changes in carbon. And so, most of the tests that you mentioned on your slide are useful for monitoring soil health, or how, the active carbon might be, how much, how the microbial population is doing. That's all really useful for measuring soil health. But the amount of carbon you have in the soil doesn't, like inorganic material, does not reflect stored carbon. Some of that carbon is not going to be stored. So I just want to distinguish soil health testing, really great. Carbon testing, not so much.
All right. Thank you. Thank you both for that answer. Next question is from Jeffrey Scales. And this is a question for Didi. Will Ben's operation have enough economic support to continue to fund his work and research?
I certainly hope so. I don't think I can answer that. I don't know if Ben is on here, at the conference, or if anyone from his team is that might be able to answer that in the chat, but I certainly hope so. He is, obviously been a transformative figure in a lot of these things in a lot of different areas. So I hope so.
Didi, I saw something in the Q&A box, but it disappeared. Was there something, Jack, was there something else that somebody wanted to say, somebody from CSG wanted to answer?
Sorry, Carolyn, can you say that again?
There was something in the Q&A box that just got dismissed, I think, and I'm reluctant to switch up. Let's see if I can find it. No, answered. Let's see here. It said something about somebody else wanting to answer this. This question. Oh, okay. This has been answered live. Okay.
Sorry, yeah, I just marked it as answered.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, listen, I think Didi has answered it. So shall we, is Ben here? Does he want to answer?
What's Ben's last name?
I think it's Scale. No, that was the questioner, Jeffrey Scales. I didn't catch that. Didi, Ben
Banks Dobson. I don't know if there's anyone else from his
okay.
Hudson Carbon, or his one of his team members.
Okay, I don't see Ben in the conference, unfortunately, but
okay. Well, if somebody is here that wants to respond to that, please feel free to chat or go into question and answer, and just mark, let us know that you're willing to answer. The third and last question that we have here is for Ryan, and I'm not exactly sure what the questioner wants, but Ryan, I'm also happy to answer this or address this as well when you're done. So the question is, Ryan, is this working group also looking into language of decolonizing environmentalism when advertising the proactive practices to farmers? Is there a lot of rebranding / cultural appropriation in land sustainability technology taken from oppressed peoples?
Yeah, thanks for the question. The Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group has not elevated or looked into the question just disappeared, so I can't reference it. Sorry, same issue here, but that specific framing is not something that the working group has considered at this time explicitly. Would be happy to be shared. If you could share some more information on that, I could perhaps provide some more background into how the working group is trying to address questions of equity and access and programs that may be recommended by the working group. I think those equity considerations are really important, and making sure that maladaptive practices aren't adopted or recommended, and trying to consider kind of the holistic impacts is something that is moving through not just the Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group, but the Vermont Climate Council as well has a specific Just Transition Subcommittee, which is helping to inform that process and also is incorporated into the ag emission reduction and the ag adaptation and resilience conversation as well. So definitely having those conversations, but not explicitly that concept.
Thanks, Ryan. And what I would add is this, at the beginning of the year, we had the Vermont Agriculture and Food System Strategic Plan released for 2021 to 2030. And I would recommend that anybody look at it. I'm going to just show you there. Can you see that? It's available, I believe, at the vermontfarmtoplate.com website. And one of the priority strategies that was laid out, this is an amazingly comprehensive piece of work. I recommend it to all of you. It's available online for free. One of the priority strategies was to continue the work of the Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group. And part of the preface, and I think this is important, is that, and I'm quoting now, "We are on the land which has served as a site of meeting and exchange among indigenous peoples for thousands of years and is the home of the Western Abenaki people. The Farm to Plate Network honors, recognizes, and respects these peoples, especially the Abenaki, as the traditional stewards of the land and waters. In that spirit, we acknowledge that we are guests in this land. We need to respect and help protect the lands within our use. Those who will implement the strategic plan have the responsibility to help make this truth visible, to support efforts toward Indigenous sovereignty and well-being, and to dismantle the legacies of colonialism here in Vermont." I don't know if that helps to answer your question, Sal. I'm wondering if there are any other questions. We have about 10 minutes left.
Carolyn, we have 2 more questions in the chat from Lori and Natalie.
Okay, let's see. I'm going to try and get to the chat.
Okay.
You know, Jack, I don't, oh, okay, hold on a sec.
Sure.
I
can read them off if it's easier.
Okay. Okay, Lori, where does Briana Alfaro suggest the money come from to assist with the costs of the transition to soil carbon storing land management? Briana.
Yeah, I think that state and federal programs should continue to fund these sorts of programs and, you know, fund them with even more money. You know, a lot of these programs, as I mentioned before, can be inaccessible for various reasons. There are some qualifications and really even just, you know, especially if you're a beginning farmer or if you're just someone who has trouble understanding the infrastructure, finding your way around state programs and federal programs. There are some resources out there. It's just hard to navigate. That's where I think that organizations like NOFA, you know, the NOFAs across the region, as well as Soul Fire Farm, that work one-on-one with farmers are so important and really need to continue to be funded to do this work because you know, we can reach these farmers and provide them with access to these programs. Yeah.
Can I just also add, I would add the National Young Farmers Coalition as well, which happens to be headquartered in my district, but as another great resource as well.
Thanks, Didi. And Natalie has a question which is along the same lines, and you may have answered at least partially, Briana. What are a few ways to support new BIPOC low-income farmers?
Number one, give them land. Farmers of color have a history of and want to farm with these regenerative practice. The problem is that we don't have access to land. So I would say first and foremost, that would be it. Again, culturally appropriate technical service providers, which is something I would really like actually Soulfire Farm is actually launching a mentorship program. It's not focused specifically on soil health, but their programs always include soil health at the heart. So more mentorship programs that provide assistance from culturally appropriate technical service providers. Yeah, and I think continuing to fund organizations that work on the front lines with farmers of color. I think that's what we need.
Can I also pipe in here too and add?
Please, please, Didi, pipe
good
in.
answers here. I would also add again the Young Farmers, National Young Farmers Coalition, but also Cornell has a program that's focused. I mean, they have one that's focused on veteran farmers and another, I think that's that focuses on beginning farmers of color as well. And so I think those are just other things that should be on people's radar screens. And, totally agree on the issue of land. It's something we've worked on in New York State very hard and passed legislation to keep moving those opportunities forward.
And I know that's part of the strategic plan that I just referenced, as well as the work. And I don't know if there are similar organizations in other states, but the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, as well as Vermont Land Trust, is looking at ways to find ways to make sure that young, well, not even young, but BIPOC farmers have access to land in Vermont. Any other questions? Oh, hold on, there's one in the Q&A. Jeffrey Scales asked, could you all speak to creative techniques for providing funding capital for preserving existing farms, support new farmers, particularly BIPOC farmers? Maybe some of that's been answered, but if anyone would like to jump in again to answer that question, happy to hear it. Creative techniques for providing funding and capital for preserving existing farms, support new farmers, particularly BIPOC farmers. Do you think we've answered that one?
Some foundation interests in, in the Northeast in that area. Some, venture capitals and capital and other farmers. I mean, I think it's an area. I mean, I think that's Jeffrey's area, so he should be telling us what those ideas are. I'm certainly interested in, I think we all are interested in advancing any of those incipient ideas or incipient, ventures to support BIPOC farmers and young farmers. They are our future.
Thanks, Didi. And if you want to, Sara, is your hand up? Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing about preserving existing farms. I don't know a lot about the details of this, but we have a program in Maryland for ag preservation and conservation. And so people can put their farms into ag preservation and guarantee that they will not sell the development rights on their farm. And so it will persist as a working farm. And I think there's quite a bit of funding for that. So as long as they're willing to make that commitment not to, sell in future to developers, then they are able to get, I think, really good tax breaks or some other sources of support, which might keep the farm going.
Yeah, and we have that happening also in Vermont. Ryan, you go ahead.
Yeah, jump in here and share. I think within the working group, one of the areas of focus is trying to identify those areas of uncompensated benefit that ag land provides to those that aren't farming. A big area of discussion is avoided costs. As I shared with the infrastructure damage abatement, that is something that the town didn't have to pay for. But if the agricultural land was not being farmed in that way, or perhaps farmers could be compensated to improve their management to further provide benefit to those downstream landowners, that's a benefit that's being uncompensated. If that can be put into some sort of payment mechanism through a payment for ecosystem services program, that can help farmers stay on the land and keep farming better. And so I think that's an area of focus that the group is very much interested in exploring that could support existing farms to continue to be able to farm. And also the benefits, there are costs to the farmers, right? Flooding ruins crops. It causes erosion. You got to put the field back. And that may be right for a riparian easement, or maybe it shouldn't be in agriculture if it's flooded every year. But that's another conversation, and there are programs there to kind of support that that process as well. But yeah, uncompensated benefit, I think, is a focus for the farmers. Thanks.
Oh, we're just about out of time. We have we're getting more questions. So the next one, and I don't know how long we can go, guys, but Josie Gordon asks, what is the single most important thing farmers can do to help sequester atmospheric carbon? Sara?
Well, I think adopt some of these NRCS conservation practices, and two of the key ones are no-till and the use of cover crops. Both no-till and cover crops protect the soil, feed the soil microbes, and keep the carbon in the ground. Tillage is one of the main causes of carbon loss, both through wind and water erosion and through decomposition by microbes. So no-till, cover crops, that would be the place to start.
All right. Any other takers on that one?
Yeah, I would just add, I think compost serves a role, and I don't personally keep livestock in my operation. I'm just not there yet. I think including livestock and really diversifying farms and crop rotations are really important as well. But I just want to add to that, there is no one solution. I think it's very context specific. Every farm is different. Every watershed is different. There is no magic bullet answer to any of this.
All right. So Jack, we have two additional questions, and I'm wondering if these are things that could be kind of put into the record and answered in some other way, or should we just go for it and get them answered?
I think we should probably stick to time. I think we're a minute over, so I'm going to save these questions and allow panelists to answer them offline if they like.
Fantastic. Well, I want to take a moment to thank again all of our panelists today for all of your good work, for CSG East and Scenic Hudson for putting this whole presentation together. And we are going to take a break for about 5 minutes and then be back at noon with the Roundtable on Forest Carbon Opportunities. Thank you all, and we will take a break.
Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Carolyn. Great. Thank you.